My son's teacher called to threaten me for spreading lies after I found dozens of folders on her phone with boys' names and photos. When I told her I wasn't backing down, she snapped, "I made him love me. You're just jealous." I didn't say a word. That was 2 years ago. Yesterday, they let her away in shackles. I rushed out of Whole Foods when I realized I was late to pick up my son after I missed his 15 phone calls. Despite me literally running, the main office told me that my son was already picked up earlier by an ambulance. I thought they were joking, but everyone in the office somehow became whiter than I thought possible. I started asking every question I could have possible asked, just to be met with, "I don't knows." They could tell I was freaking out, so a woman gave me a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "Take your son out of this still school while you still have time. Please, I'm begging you." I was speechless. Looking back, I had no idea just how badly he needed to leave that school after what they did to him. Before I could say anything else, she brought over the main teacher to tell me what hospital my son was at. It was a 10-minute drive, but I made it in 5. And when I got there, Mikey was being wheeled to the ICU. His eyes were closed, and I could barely see the rest of his tiny self through the flood of nurses. That's when a police officer came up to me and brought me into the nearby police station. Talk about a wild goose chase. He asked me if I ever watched Korn on my phone. I furrowed my eyebrows, and once the confusion wore off, a rage boiled my blood. It felt like some sort of sick joke. But then Dave, the officer, took a deep breath. "Sir, please answer the question," he said, keeping his face straight and his voice assertive. I shook my head. How the F is this? But I was interrupted, not by him talking over me, but by the sight of tears in his eyes. "I've been in this job for 25 years, and still any case involving young'uns still makes me cry," he said between sobs. That's when I knew that he took his job seriously, and something very wrong had happened. Well, I didn't want to stop him from oversharing more details than he probably should, so I stayed completely silent. "Your son was found in a bush with one of the teachers," a passerby noticed. "What the F were they doing?" I asked. Dave pursed his lips, realizing that he had shared more of the case than he was allowed. So I threw my phone down on the table in front of us and pointed at my lock screen. "This is my little boy. I promised myself a long time ago that I'd do anything to keep him safe. You can tell me anything." Dave glanced at the picture frame on the table of his own kids and nodded. "A passerby called and said your son was jerking it in the bush with Miss Waters. But Miss Waters claimed your son has just been watching too much Korn." I felt the color drain from my face. Suddenly, everything made sense. Up until this point, my son was coming home every day raving about a new crush, about how she was buying things for him, how smart and mature she was. I never knew that crush was a grown adult, but it still didn't explain why my son was in the hospital. And that's when Dave kept going. "Apparently when they got caught, my son hit himself over the head with a rock." I quickly put the pieces together. "You see, my son is the type of person to watch you get caught by the police and take the blame for it. And that's exactly what happened here. He must have seen it as an act of love." Suddenly the room was spinning, and I buried my head in my hands. I thought back to what that assistant teacher told me. Dave promised that he and his team would do everything they could. I knew by the look in his eyes that he meant what he said. The next few hours were hell. I spent the entire night in the waiting room, wondering if my son had just sacrificed his life for a kitty fiddler or not. And I had to keep my promise to Officer Dave. So even though I texted into the parents' WhatsApp group chat, I kept it super vague. Just gave the details most people already knew. But still, my phone was blowing up with texts from the other moms and dads. You see, my son was attending an all-boys school, and all the texts were about creepy things they had seen Miss Waters get away with. One dad told me that his son's grades were getting bumped up in exchange for a daily hug when no one was looking. Another mom told me that one day when her child still hadn't walked home from school, she went to pick him up, and in the classroom, she caught Miss Waters with only 2 of her blouse buttons done up, revealing her cleavage to her son. So by the time the surgeons told me my son was okay, I was seeing red. He was resting, but they told me he'd make a full recovery. I was sitting beside him waiting for him to wake up when a visitor walked in. It was Miss effing Waters. She draped herself over his unconscious self, and I wanted to wrap the IV drip around her neck until she couldn't breathe, but unfortunately, that was illegal. So instead I gave her a huge hug. You see, I instantly caught sight of her phone in her back pocket, and I had already vowed to myself to do everything I could to have her locked up. So after I got it, I asked her if I could meet her by the vending machine. She said yes, and as soon as she left, I unlocked her phone. The password was my son's birthday, and in the camera roll were dozens of folders, all named after different kids in his class. Some were innocent, just them on sports day and other school events. Others were very much not. Kids in janitors' closets, in classrooms when the school was empty, all performing acts I don't even want to describe. My hands trembled as I scrolled through folder after folder. Each one had a different boy's name: Tommy, Marcus, Jake, and there, near the bottom, Mikey. My stomach churned as I opened it, finding photos that made my blood run cold. Some were innocent enough, classroom shots, field trip pictures, but others showed my son in compromising positions, always with Miss Waters somewhere in the frame, touching him, holding him, positioning herself too close. I quickly forwarded the most damning evidence to my own phone, my fingers moving frantically across the screen. The timestamp on one video showed it was from just last week, another from 2 months ago. This had been going on for so long, right under our noses. The door creaked open. Miss Waters walked back in, her heels clicking against the hospital floor. I slipped her phone back into my pocket and forced my face into a neutral expression, though bile rose in my throat. She touched my arm, her fingers lingering too long. Her perfume was overwhelming, sickly sweet. I watched her return to Mikey's bedside, watched her stroke his unconscious hair with those same hands that had violated him. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. Dave arrived 20 minutes later, responding to my urgent text, but Miss Waters had already left, claiming she needed to check on other students. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Other students. How many others? I showed Dave everything I'd found on her phone. His face hardened with each photo, each video. His jaw clenched tighter and tighter until I thought it might snap. He made a call, and within an hour, a detective specializing in crimes against children arrived at the hospital. The detective, a woman named Rodriguez, studied the evidence with practiced eyes. She recognized patterns immediately. The grooming techniques, the escalation, the way Miss Waters had positioned herself as a trusted adult. This wasn't amateur hour. This was calculated, methodical abuse. Mikey stirred in his bed, his eyes fluttering open. The first word out of his mouth broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Miss Waters?" He looked around frantically, searching for her. When I told him she wasn't coming, he became agitated, trying to sit up despite the bandages on his head. head. You don't understand, he insisted, his voice cracking. She loves me. We're special. She said so. The words hit me like physical blows. My little boy, my precious son, had been so thoroughly manipulated he couldn't see the truth. Detective Rodriguez exchanged a knowing look with Dave. They'd seen this before. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm glad you listened to my warning. There's more you need to know. Can we meet? Sarah, the assistant teacher. A hospital psychiatrist arrived to evaluate Mikey. Dr. Chen spoke with him gently, asking careful questions while I waited outside. Through the small window in the door, I watched my son's animated gestures, the way he defended Miss Waters, insisted she was misunderstood. After an hour, Dr. Chen emerged with a grim expression. The signs were all there. Classic grooming behavior, psychological manipulation, trauma bonding. Mikey would need immediate therapeutic intervention, possibly for years. While the psychiatrist explained treatment options, I noticed something sticking out from under Mikey's pillow. A phone I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I pulled it out. A cheap prepaid model, the kind you could buy with cash at any convenience store. The messages on it dated back months. Miss Waters telling Mikey he was special, that their love was pure, that no one else would understand. Instructions on how to delete messages, when to call her, what to say if anyone asked questions. The manipulation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. 3 more sets of parents arrived at the hospital within the hour. The Johnsons, whose son Marcus was in Mikey's class. The Patels, looking shell-shocked. The Williams family. The father's face a mask of barely controlled rage. Word was spreading through the parent network like wildfire. Each family had found their son's name in those folders. Each had stories of behavioral changes they'd dismissed as normal adolescent moodiness. Secrets where there had been none before. Gifts they couldn't explain. New phones hidden in backpacks. The next morning, my phone rang. Principal Henderson, not calling to check on Mikey's condition, but to threaten legal action. His voice was cold, calculated. I understand you've been spreading malicious rumors about one of our most decorated teachers, he said. Miss Waters has an impeccable record. If you continue down this path, the school will have no choice but to pursue defamation charges. I hung up on him. Looking through old school photos that afternoon, a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. Every group photo from the past year, there was Miss Waters, always positioned near Mikey, her hand on his shoulder at the science fair, standing directly behind him at the holiday concert, sitting next to him at the awards assembly. How had we not seen it? My phone buzzed with a text from Miss Waters herself. She was claiming Mikey had attacked her, that she was the real victim here, that she was considering pressing charges for assault. The audacity of it took my breath away. My wife Lisa flew back from her business trip that evening. The strain between us was immediate and palpable. She blamed herself for being away so much. I blamed myself for pushing Mikey to excel at the prestigious school. We sat on opposite sides of his hospital bed, the gulf between us widening with each moment of silence. The next day brought another call, this time from a school board member named Richard Waters, Miss Waters' uncle. He offered to meet privately to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to this unfortunate misunderstanding. The promise of compensation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I recorded the call. That evening, I noticed something strange in my email. Someone had tried to access my cloud storage where I'd backed up the evidence. Multiple failed login attempts from an IP address I didn't recognize. I immediately created additional backups, encrypting everything and storing copies in multiple locations. Sarah, the assistant teacher who'd warned me, agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she held her cup. She'd reported Miss Waters 3 times over the past 2 years. Each time she'd been called into Principal Henderson's office. Each time she'd been threatened with termination if she didn't stop making trouble. The 3rd time, they'd put a formal reprimand in her file for creating a hostile work environment. 5 families had formed an alliance by the end of the week. We met in the Johnsons' living room, comparing notes about our son's behavioral changes. The patterns were undeniable. Each boy had been isolated from friends, sworn to secrecy, given special attention and gifts. Each had defended Miss Waters when questioned. I recognized the grooming stages from mandatory reporter training at my own job. The way I'd kicked myself for missing the signs kept me up at night. How could I have been so blind? Mrs. Chen called the next morning. Her son, Mikey's best friend, had finally admitted something. Miss Waters had made him do things to protect Mikey from getting in trouble. The web of manipulation extended further than any of us had imagined. Sarah provided documentation that made everything click into place. Miss Waters had been transferred from her previous school after allegations. No formal investigation, no charges filed, just a quiet transfer to our district with a glowing recommendation letter. When our growing group of parents confronted Principal Henderson, he dismissed our concerns with practiced ease. We were misunderstanding innocent affection. Miss Waters was just a dedicated teacher who cared deeply about her students. We were seeing problems where none existed, but we had evidence, we had documentation, and now we had each other. A parent posted about the situation in the community Facebook group that night. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times. Local news stations started calling. The school was forced to issue a statement, though it was nothing more than empty platitudes about taking all concerns seriously while protecting the reputation of their valued staff members. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a predator protected by an institution more concerned with its reputation than its students. On the other, a group of parents who would stop at nothing to protect their children and ensure justice was served. This was just the beginning. Miss Waters hired an aggressive lawyer within days. Cease and desist letters arrived at every parent's home, threatening defamation lawsuits if we continued discussing the case. The thick legal envelopes felt heavy with intimidation. As I read through mine at the kitchen table, I realized Mikey's behavioral changes over the past year suddenly made terrible sense. The isolation from friends, the secrets he wouldn't share, the expensive gifts he couldn't explain, all classic grooming signs I'd missed while focusing on work and assuming his withdrawal was normal teenage behavior. During Mikey's therapy session that week, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. My son had started describing special games involving not just Miss Waters, but potentially other teachers. The child psychologist's expression grew more concerned as she explained the implications. This might be bigger than one predator. The school's IT administrator contacted me through Sarah late one night. Meeting in a parking garage like something out of a movie, he handed over a USB drive with trembling hands. He was risking his job, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. The drive contained Miss Waters' deleted emails showing coordination with other other staff members about private tutoring sessions. I installed security cameras around our house after finding my car tires slashed one morning. The message spray painted on our garage door was clear: drop it. Lisa discovered it first, her scream waking the entire neighborhood. We filed a police report, but I knew this was just the beginning of the intimidation. Detective Rodriguez called with updates on the investigation. Multiple victims across different grades were coming forward. The case was building momentum, even as the school administration continued denying everything. She warned me to document any threats or suspicious activity. 7 families united by the end of that month, pooling resources to hire a legal team and private investigator. We met in each other's homes, rotating locations for safety. The shared pain and determination in that room created an unbreakable bond between us. The private investigator uncovered disturbing information about Miss Waters' past. Her teaching certificate had been flagged in 2 other states for concerning behavior, but somehow she'd been cleared to teach here. The pattern of enabling stretched back years. A young man reached out through our lawyer. Now 18, he'd been one of Miss Waters' students 4 years ago. He was ready to testify about what she'd done to him, hoping to protect current students from the same fate. His courage inspired us to keep fighting despite the mounting pressure. I maintained careful social media posts about child safety and the importance of believing victims, never naming names but keeping public attention on the issue. The school's threats couldn't silence the growing community concern. Parents who weren't directly affected began asking questions at school board meetings. Mikey's therapy revealed deeper psychological torture. Miss Waters had told him other boys would be hurt if he didn't comply with her demands. She'd created an elaborate system of guilt and responsibility that trapped him in silence. Dr. Chen worked patiently to untangle the web of manipulation. Another teacher, Mr. Phillips, approached me after school one day. He'd seen concerning behavior, but been told to mind his own business by the administration. His hands shook as he described watching Miss Waters isolate boys, knowing something was wrong but being powerless to act without proof. Family therapy sessions exposed the strain on our marriage. Lisa blamed me for pushing Mikey into the elite school, for prioritizing prestige over safety. I blamed myself too, but we were fracturing when we needed unity most. The therapist helped us refocus on supporting our son rather than assigning blame. Parents demanded Miss Waters' immediate suspension at the next school board meeting. The board claimed she was on medical leave, but several parents spotted her car in the school parking lot the following week. The lies were becoming harder for them to maintain. Sarah revealed she'd been recording conversations with Principal Henderson for months. The audio files contained clear threats about her job if she continued reporting concerns about Miss Waters. She documented everything, preparing for this moment when the truth would finally matter. Federal investigators entered the case when evidence suggested interstate trafficking of images. The FBI's involvement immediately changed the dynamic. The school could intimidate local parents, but federal agents were a different matter entirely. Miss Waters' support from the school administration crumbled as investigators arrived with warrants. Watching them carry boxes of evidence from the main office felt like the first real victory in our fight. The principal's confident facade finally showed cracks. The search of Miss Waters' home revealed a disturbing shrine-like collection. Student photos, items of clothing, detailed notes about boys' schedules and habits dating back years. The obsession documented in that house made even hardened investigators pause. Lisa fully committed to the fight after Mikey broke down during dinner one night. He sobbed about thinking everything was his fault, that he'd done something to make Miss Waters notice him. Holding our broken son, my wife and I found our unity again in shared purpose. The parent group's unified pressure forced an emergency school board meeting. The auditorium was packed with concerned community members. Board members who dismissed us for weeks now faced a room full of angry parents demanding answers and action. We were offered a substantial settlement to keep quiet. The school district's lawyers presented it as best for the children, avoiding a traumatic trial, but we chose to proceed publicly, knowing future students needed protection more than we needed money. During her deposition, Miss Waters accidentally revealed her mindset. She spoke about her relationships with students as if they were consensual, unable to recognize the power imbalance and manipulation. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but the damage was done. Mikey's hidden phone yielded more evidence. Messages showed Miss Waters had coached him extensively on what to say if anyone questioned their friendship. She'd prepared him to lie to protect her, making him complicit in his own abuse. 3 school board members resigned rather than continue defending the administration's handling of the situation. Their departures spoke louder than any public statement. The remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves from previous decisions. National media attention forced the state education department to launch a full investigation into the school's hiring and oversight practices. Reporters interviewed parents outside school grounds. The story was spreading beyond our control, but it meant accountability was finally possible. My employer granted me indefinite leave to focus on Mikey's recovery in the case. My boss, a father himself, understood that some things matter more than quarterly reports. The support from unexpected places kept us going during dark moments. Principal Henderson finally admitted knowing about concerns, but prioritizing the school's reputation. His confession came during a heated school board meeting where parents wouldn't let him deflect anymore. The truth was ugly. He'd chosen image over children's safety repeatedly. 23 victims were identified across Miss Waters' teaching career as more families came forward. The number was staggering, representing years of systematic abuse enabled by institutional blindness. Each new victim added weight to our demand for systemic change. Her high-powered lawyers abandoned the case as evidence mounted and public opinion turned. Even they couldn't defend the indefensible once the full scope became clear. Miss Waters was left scrambling for new representation. The previous school district where Miss Waters taught finally admitted the truth. They'd paid a settlement to make her go away rather than properly reporting the allegations. Their cowardice had simply moved the problem to our children. I focused on balancing Mikey's healing with maintaining pressure for systemic change. Some days were about therapy and quiet support. Others were about meetings, statements, and pushing for accountability. The dual mission exhausted us but felt necessary. The coalition of affected families grew to include over 30 households across multiple schools. Our support network expanded as more people recognized their children's behavioral changes in our stories. The shared recognition was both validating and heartbreaking. Miss Waters' attempts to flee the state were blocked when federal monitoring flagged her passport. She was trapped, unable to run from the consequences finally catching up. Her desperation became increasingly visible. Local news cameras captured her being served additional warrants at a grocery store. The public humiliation of being arrested between the produce and dairy aisles seemed fitting somehow. She could no longer hide behind her teacher persona. My advocacy work led to meetings with state legislators about reforming teacher screening processes. They listened to our stories with genuine concern, promising to push for stricter background checks and mandatory reporting training. Change felt possible. Financial investigators discovered Miss Waters had received suspicious payments from unknown sources over the years. The money trail suggested something darker than individual predation. Each revelation deepened the horror of what our children had endured. As her trial date approached, Miss Waters grew increasingly desperate. She began reaching out to victims' families directly, violating restraining orders. Her attempts to manipulate parents into dropping charges showed she hadn't changed at all. Multiple teachers from different schools came forward about suspicions they'd been discouraged from reporting. The pattern of institutional silencing extended beyond our school. Administrators across the district had prioritized reputation over children's safety. I realized saving Mikey meant exposing the systemic failures that enabled his abuse. This wasn't just about one predator teacher anymore. It was about changing a culture that protected abusers and silenced victims. Death threats arrived at our home, but I testified at the state education hearing anyway. Standing before the committee, I detailed how the system had failed our children. My voice shook, but the truth needed to be heard by those with power to change things. The entire school administration was placed under investigation. Interim leadership was appointed to begin rebuilding trust with the community. The house cleaning felt overdue as new faces brought fresh perspectives on child safety. Whistleblowers emerged from within the district administration. They revealed a culture of covering up problems to avoid lawsuits and negative publicity. The truth about systemic enabling was finally being documented officially. Mikey showed his first real signs of healing during a therapy session, 8 months after everything began. He was able to discuss what happened without defending Miss Waters. Dr. Chen called it a breakthrough. I cried in the parking lot afterward. Miss Waters' mother attempted to contact me, claiming her daughter was also a victim of childhood abuse. She wanted sympathy, understanding, but I couldn't excuse predatory behavior, regardless of its origins. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. The parent group rejected any narrative that minimized or excused what had been done to our children. We stood firm against attempts to generate sympathy for Miss Waters. Our children deserve justice, not equivocation. Miss Waters was arrested on 47 counts ranging from child endangerment to production of illegal material. The judge denied bail, considering her a flight risk and danger to the community. Watching her led away in handcuffs felt like long-delayed justice. The school community began a healing process under new leadership. Town halls were held to discuss implementing better protection measures. Parents who'd been silenced for years finally had voices in their children's safety. My advocacy inspired similar investigations in neighboring districts. Parents who'd noticed concerning behavior but been dismissed now had a framework for demanding action. The ripple effects of speaking truth spread throughout the region. Federal prosecutors built an airtight case using the mountain of evidence we'd helped gather. They assured us the conviction was certain given the documentation. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. A week before trial, Miss Waters' new lawyer claimed she was incompetent to stand trial. The transparent attempt to avoid accountability fooled no one. The judge ordered immediate psychiatric evaluation. Mikey suffered a setback when a classmate blamed him for ruining Miss Waters' life. The cruel words from another child who didn't understand sent him spiraling. We spent hours reassuring him that speaking truth was never wrong. The psychiatric evaluation confirmed Miss Waters was fully competent to stand trial. Her manipulation attempt had failed. She would face justice for her crimes after all. The system was finally working. Prosecutors revealed Miss Waters had kept trophies from each victim. Small items, a pencil here, a homework assignment there, that held sick significance for her. The depth of her obsession became clearer with each piece of evidence. 47 families prepared to provide impact statements at sentencing. The courthouse would hear how one predator had damaged dozens of young lives. Our collective voice would be impossible to ignore. Miss Waters released a statement through her lawyer claiming she was the victim of a witch hunt. She showed no remorse, no recognition of the harm she'd caused. Her narcissism remained intact despite overwhelming evidence of her crimes. Some community members began questioning if parents had overreacted. The backlash was predictable but still painful. We faced secondary trauma from those who couldn't accept such evil had existed in their midst. 2 families considered dropping out of the case due to pressure and threats from Miss Waters' remaining supporters. We rallied around them, providing security and emotional support. No family would stand alone in this fight. I faced my darkest moment when Mikey attempted to hurt himself, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. Finding him in the bathroom with scissors, blaming himself for everything, nearly broke me. Emergency therapy and constant supervision followed. The psychiatric evaluation results arrived the next morning. Miss Waters was declared fully competent to stand trial. Her manipulation attempt had failed spectacularly. The evaluator noted her calculated responses and clear understanding of the charges against her. That afternoon, I discovered Miss Waters had been contacting other victims through fake social media accounts. She was sending them messages designed to trigger guilt and confusion. I immediately forwarded everything to Detective Rodriguez, who added witness tampering to the growing list of charges. The prosecutor called with concerning news. Miss Waters' new defense strategy involved claiming the boys had initiated everything. She planned to paint herself as the victim of adolescent manipulation. The strategy was disgusting but legally risky for her. It essentially admitted inappropriate contact had occurred. Our parent coalition met that evening to discuss trial preparation. The prosecutor walked us through what to expect, warning us about the defense's tactics. Several mothers broke down, realizing their sons might have to testify about intimate details of their abuse. I spent the next day reinforcing our home security after noticing someone had been in our backyard. Nothing was taken, but Mikey's bedroom window had fresh scratches around the lock. The message was clear. They could get to us if they wanted. Dr. Chen recommended increasing Mikey's therapy sessions as the trial trial approached. His anxiety was manifesting in nightmares and refusal to eat. I watched my son shrink into himself, the weight of upcoming testimony crushing his small frame. The prosecutor revealed they'd found evidence of Miss Waters grooming boys at her previous schools. The pattern stretched back over a decade. Each time she'd been quietly moved along rather than reported. The systemic failure was staggering. Lisa and I attended a support group for parents of abused children. Hearing other families' stories helped us realize we weren't alone in missing the signs. The facilitator, herself a survivor's mother, taught us how to support Mikey without overwhelming him. Miss Waters' mother attempted another contact, this time showing up at our home. I found her on our porch, crying about how the charges were destroying her family. I documented everything with my phone while firmly telling her to leave before I called the police. The school district's insurance company began pressuring families to accept individual settlements. They offered substantial sums with ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Our coalition held firm. This wasn't about money, but systemic change. Detective Rodriguez informed me they'd discovered Miss Waters had been communicating with other predators online. She'd been sharing strategies for grooming and avoiding detection. The investigation was expanding beyond our local case. Mikey asked to write a letter to the judge about his experiences. I sat with him as he struggled to put words to paper, his hands shaking. He wrote about feeling special, then feeling dirty, then feeling nothing at all. I had to leave the room to compose myself. The defense filed multiple motions trying to exclude evidence. They claimed the photos from Miss Waters' phone were illegally obtained. The judge denied each motion, noting I'd had implied consent as a concerned parent in an emergency situation. Our coalition organized a silent protest outside the courthouse. 47 families stood holding photos of their sons at the age when the abuse occurred. The visual impact was powerful. Rows of innocent faces representing years of systematic predation. Miss Waters appeared at a pre-trial hearing looking haggard. Her confident teacher persona had crumbled. She kept her eyes down, refusing to look at the families in the gallery. Her lawyer did all the talking while she sat silent. The judge ruled that victims could provide testimony via closed-circuit video to avoid facing their abuser directly. This decision meant Mikey and other boys could speak their truth without being in the same room as Miss Waters. The relief on my son's face was palpable. I discovered Miss Waters had written letters to several boys before her arrest. The letters were filled with manipulation, telling them they were special, that no one understood their connection, that she was being persecuted for loving them. Each letter deepened my rage at her continued psychological abuse. The prosecutor presented the trial strategy to our families. They would methodically show the pattern of grooming, the escalation of abuse, and the institutional failures that enabled it. The case was strong, but they warned us that defense would be brutal in attacking the victim's credibility. Mikey's testimony date was set. Dr. Chen worked with him on coping strategies for the stress. We practiced the route to the courthouse, where he'd wait, how the video system worked. Preparation helped him feel more in control. 2 days before trial, one of Miss Waters' supporters vandalized several families' cars. They spray-painted "liar" across windshields. Security footage caught them, leading to additional charges for witness intimidation. The desperation of her remaining defenders was escalating. The night before trial, our coalition families gathered for mutual support. We shared fears about our sons testifying, anger at the system that failed them, and hope that justice would finally prevail. The bond between us had become unbreakable through shared trauma and determination. Trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courthouse was packed with media, community members, and families. Miss Waters entered in conservative clothing, clearly trying to present a different image than her usual appearance. The transformation fooled no one who knew the truth. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the evidence methodically. 47 victims over 10 years, hundreds of inappropriate photos, documented grooming techniques, institutional failures at multiple schools. The scope of abuse was breathtaking when presented comprehensively. Miss Waters' lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated teacher, whose affection was misinterpreted. He suggested the boys had crushes that created confusion about appropriate boundaries. The argument was offensive to every parent who understood how grooming worked. The first week of testimony focused on establishing the pattern of abuse. Former students, now adults, testified about their experiences years ago. Their courage in facing their abuser inspired the younger victims waiting for their turn. When the prosecution presented the photos from Miss Waters' phone, several jurors visibly recoiled. The images showed clear progression from innocent classroom shots to increasingly inappropriate situations. The visual evidence was undeniable. Miss Waters made a critical error by taking the stand against her lawyer's advice. She tried to explain her special relationships with students. Her inability to recognize the power imbalance and inappropriate nature of her actions shocked even seasoned court observers. Under cross-examination, Miss Waters claimed the boys had pursued her. She painted herself as unable to resist their attention. The prosecutor systematically destroyed this narrative, showing how she'd isolated vulnerable children and exploited their need for approval. Mikey's testimony day arrived. I sat in the waiting room while he spoke to the court via video link. Dr. Chen stayed with him for support. I could hear my son's voice through the door, clear, brave, telling his truth. My pride in his courage battled with rage at what he'd endured. The defense's cross-examination of victims was carefully limited by the judge. Still, they tried to suggest the boys had misremembered or exaggerated. Each attempt to discredit these children deepened the jury's obvious disgust with the defense strategy. Principal Henderson testified under immunity about the school's failures. His admission that he'd prioritized reputation over student safety drew gasps from the gallery. His cowardice in enabling abuse was laid bare for everyone to see. The forensic computer expert testified about the hidden folders, the encrypted communications, and the sophisticated methods Miss Waters used to hide her activities. The level of premeditation and planning showed this wasn't impulse, but calculated predation. After 2 weeks of testimony, the prosecution rested. They'd presented overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse, enabled by institutional failures. The defense's case seemed hopeless, but they proceeded with character witnesses who praised Miss Waters' teaching ability. The defense's witnesses couldn't explain away the evidence. Several admitted they'd noticed concerning behavior, but hadn't reported it. Their testimony actually strengthened the prosecution's case about systemic enabling. Closing arguments brought everything full circle. The prosecutor spoke directly to the jury about the courage it took for these boys to come forward. He reminded them that justice meant holding both the predator and the enablers accountable. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. As they filed back in, I held Lisa's hand tightly. Mikey was at home with his therapist, unable to face hearing the verdict in person. The foreman stood and began reading. Guilty on all 47 counts. The word rang through the courtroom 47 times. Miss Waters showed no emotion until the final count. Then she collapsed into her chair, finally understanding she would face consequences. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Families provided impact statements about the destruction left in Miss Waters' wake. Boys who'd been outgoing became withdrawn. Straight-A students struggled academically. Trust in adults was shattered. The human cost was laid bare. The judge sentenced Miss Waters to 45 years in prison. She would be eligible for parole in 30 years, likely spending most of her remaining life behind bars. As they led her away, she looked small and pathetic, nothing like the confident predator who'd stalked our children. Principal Henderson and 3 administrators were convicted of failure to report suspected abuse. They received probation and were banned from working in education. The message was clear: enabling abuse through inaction would have consequences. The school district implemented sweeping changes. New screening procedures, mandatory reporting training, and anonymous tip lines were established. Parent oversight committees were given real power. The culture of secrecy was replaced with transparency. Our coalition didn't dissolve after the trial. We transformed into an advocacy group, pushing for statewide reforms in how schools handle abuse allegations. Our tragedy became purpose, ensuring other children would be protected. 6 months after the verdict, Mikey smiled genuinely for the first time in over a year. He joined the robotics club at his new school, making friends who knew nothing about his past. Healing was slow, but finally happening. Lisa and I renewed our commitment to each other and our family. The trial had tested us, but we'd emerged stronger. We learned to recognize signs of trauma in each other and provide support without judgment. A year later, I received a letter from a parent in another state. Our case had inspired them to demand investigation into their own school's handling of abuse allegations. The ripple effects of speaking truth continued spreading, protecting children we'd never meet. 3 years after that day at Whole Foods, I watched Mikey graduate middle school with honors. He walked across the stage with confidence, no longer the broken boy from the hospital bed. He'd reclaimed his childhood through therapy, love, and incredible courage. Miss Waters served her time in prison, while our community had transformed. Schools now had systems that actually protected children. Parents were educated about grooming signs. Most importantly, victims knew they would be believed and supported. I continued advocating for abuse survivors, speaking at conferences and training sessions. Each time I told our story, I thought about that assistant teacher's whispered warning. She'd risked everything to protect children. Now I did the same, knowing that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to stay silent when children are in danger.